Good morning, everyone. It's Friday, September the 12th. We have made it. It is September WASDE Day, objective yield data, potential surprises. That is the entire focus. Maybe not this morning, but I think at 11 o'clock on the dot, we are going to have increased volatility finally for the first time this week, and that will dominate price discovery, at least for a short period of time. I think, too, lingering in the background, we're going to be on to South American weather pretty soon after this. Geopolitics are not going anywhere, so that is important, especially with respect to things like wheat, soybean, sorghum demand, and U.S.-China relationship. So that will be the forefront of our research, again, starting Monday morning very quickly. But Dan, it's all about yields today. If you want to go ahead and break down what you're seeing, what are the ingredients for yield this year and why we think what we think.
No, it is, Ben. It's all about yields today. But I did want to mention that Secretary Treasury Basse will be meeting Chinese Vice Premier in Madrid next week. That did give in the market yesterday late in the day. And so I'm not sure what will happen from this meeting, but the U.S. diplomatically seems to be chasing China. This is somewhat different. China's not chasing the United States. This is the United States chasing China. Whether or not China wants to do a deal, I'm doubtful. I will only say that China continues to reiterate that, it needs to have 20% fentanyl tariffs lowered if it's going to be buying U.S. soybeans. So I think this is a setup for President Trump and Xi maybe to meet at the APEC meeting in late October, November. Whether or not a trade deal comes after that will be key. But again, I think the Chinese are the masters of delay, and they'll continue to delay this as long as they can. Whether or not it's delayed into the Brazilian harvested on January will be key. But as you said, Ben, today is all about, what I imagine to be yields. And we do get objective yield reports today from the field. Now, this is a counting report. This report today is all about ear numbers and pod numbers. USDA will try to pull some ears, if you will, to weigh them down to 15.5% moisture to see what bushel weights are, but it's not going to be representative of the entire crop. So if you take the record yield numbers that we found and Pro Farmer found on tours, and you look at pod weights, maybe at a 5-year average or an ear weight at a 5-year average, we could end up with, again, a sizable corn and soybean yield today. What we do in October will depend upon, those ear weights and pod weights, what comes forward. We were drier than normal in the month of August, and I'll highlight that a little bit here. But these are maps showing the growing season. So this is as of May, really through into the September 10th timeframe. You can see there's some pockets of dryness, if you will, across portions of the Southeast, Midwest, is stretching into the Ohio Valley. And then as we look at temperatures, nothing really standing out there, Ben. It was a growing season that had some heat sporadically, but nothing lasting. And so temperatures really averaged out in that long stretch of the growing season to be near to below average. As you think about where we're going on this whole thing, I'd like to go back and just reflect a little bit about what USDA will find and where we look at the overall trend here. This was the driest August looking backwards to 2020. This is a Corn Belt precipitation weighted map from NOAA on your left. You can see that we ended up here, at that lowest level looking backwards. And a lot of that was due to the dryness that I put in the map to your right, which is across the southern and central Midwest and northern Delta. Those were the areas at the driest, and that's where crops suffered and condition ratings fell accordingly. Was it the driest August on record? No. This was a kind of a dry August, if you will, drier than the year before, but not the driest on record. You can see those Augusts being reflected in this model or this map going back to 1895. But it was a dry August nonetheless. We probably lost some yield accordingly because we're going to have smaller soybean seed size, and we may not have the bushel weight in some of the other corn that is forthcoming. That being said, I'm still optimistic that this is a record large corn crop, and we still may see a big soybean yield today. I say that because if we look at July precipitation, Iowa was the second wettest on record. Illinois, the 123rd wettest on record. It was a wet month of July. So farmers were coming into August praying that the moisture would shut off. And so we had a lot of soil moisture going into the month of August. I think this helps bridge the gap in corn in particular. But again, we'll see what USDA says today. If you were to ask me where I think the U.S. corn yield ends up today, it's somewhere between 186 and 189 bushels an acre. We'll see how this all plays out. As you think about where temperatures were holding during the month of August. Here's a map that indicates that we were cooler than normal across much of the eastern third of the United States. No real extreme heat during the month of August, and that was helpful. So we came into the month with an abundance of soil moisture and no real heat stress, if you will. 2024 did have a considerable amount of heat stress, particularly in the last half of the month, which really did a number on corn and soybean yields. As we look looking at history, looking back to 1895, you can see that August was, of course, a cooler than normal month by just a skosh. In fact, it was the coolest month since 2019. And so 2010 is highlighted there. I know in the industry, a lot of people are pointing to 2010 and its importance on yield, and I agree with that. But again, this month was not as warm, and we didn't have the warm nights that persisted beyond the, let's say, first week of August. So I think that's important to highlight that this does not correlate well with 2010. There's also been a fair amount of discussion in the market about diseases, foliar diseases. And so as you look at where we are with southern rust is evident in the United States every year. In the South in particular, that's why we call it southern rust. It's a follicle that comes into the late season. Normally, it doesn't have a big impact on yield. You can see this year that not all of the Midwest is impacted with southern rust, but we do have incidents of it, particularly stretching from, let's say, that Kansas-Nebraska border up until about the eastern portions of South Dakota, and then stretching over to Wisconsin. Now, if you find southern rust when corn is in dent, the average yield loss is 0 to 5%. So, late milk or early dent, it's really not a problem. And we believe that's a lot of the case when the southern rust. As we were on our crop tour in the middle of August, we did find southern rust in Iowa, but many of those fields were late dough or early dent. And so we don't think the impact on yield will be significant. But nonetheless, the market's been very worried about southern rust and what it may do to the overall yield. As we look at southern rust last year, we also had southern rust. This is a middle of September map prevailing across much of eastern South Dakota, eastern Nebraska, stretching up into Minnesota, Iowa, and then incidents of it in northern Illinois and Wisconsin. So as I said earlier, southern rust is around all the time. We did have gray leaf spots, something I remember very well in 1995. Back then, we didn't use fungicides. Gray leaf spots showed up in June and then persisted, and we had a big rally in the market accordingly. I don't see this the same as gray leaf spot. There will be some yield loss, but I'm not sure it'll be significant on a national basis. We'll see how it all pans out. For those farmers that didn't treat fields with fungicides in July, it will be more important in terms of what their yield degradation is due to southern rust. That being said, Ben, I think in a general sense, we're still going to be seeing big crops today. I think in a general sense, the soybean market, if we use an average pod weight of 5 years and multiply at times the numbers, we may have a bearish surprise on soybeans. But let's see what the USDA gives us. I'm only trying to highlight what weather was and where crops were sitting before we went into this dry stretch. Back to you, Ben.
Yeah, a great rundown. And again, you presented pretty well. The evidence that we think supports, still a corn yield above 186, soybeans above 53. And something we've thought about too is just, keeping in mind dry land corn in Kansas and Nebraska performing incredibly well. It's not something we've seen recently. So just the arithmetic there, I think, still gives big crops. Otherwise, it's left to the USDA today. It's left to combine data, in the next 2 to 4 weeks. That's what's going to determine, I think, the supply side of the balance sheet. But we all want to be prepared. That's sort of the thing. And again, do we need to ration supplies? What will be the timing of Brazilian soybean seeding? What are South American weather probabilities? All these things are going to determine price discovery over the next 6 or 8 months. So we're still kind of playing defense. So we'll see what the USDA gives us. Yield estimates are wide ranging, but again, be prepared. Risk management should be top of mind as we get into the harvest season. So good luck with the report today. We're going to see fireworks probably at 11 a.m. And if you need any information, we'll do a full rundown tonight. So $1 gets you in for 30 days. All the best, and we'll see you Monday.